going to sound really funny, but if you kind of feel like you've lost your way, I don't know what it is, but you go out there, you run 100 miles and you're out there for 24 plus hours. You have so much time to think about everything. And I always joke with people like, yeah, I solved world hunger out there kind of thing. You know what I mean? Because your gears are turning the whole time. And it's funny because you can really think about things, or sometimes you don't have to think about anything. And you're just caught in that moment of, running and your surroundings and stuff.
You are listening to the No Gimmicks, Just Sweat podcast with your host, Eric Logan. No Gimmicks, Just Sweat is dedicated to hearing the journeys and unique stories behind an athlete's training and what drives them. Get inspired to own your life and make the impossible possible. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Also, please take a few seconds to rate the show and drop me a review. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of No Gimmicks, Just Sweat. And today we are welcoming back from season 1, episode 2, Cassy Campanella to the show. Cassy, how are you doing?
Living the dream, per usual.
As always. And this time, a first for the show, we have her husband, Jared, along for the ride. Jared, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well.
Great. And of course, we always start the show with rapid fire questions to kind of break the ice a little bit. Cassy, you've already done it. So now let's put Jared on the spot and see how he answers those questions.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. Morning runs or evening runs?
Evening runs.
All right. Solo runs or group runs?
Group runs.
Run on the treadmill or run outside?
Definitely outside.
Okay. I was going to be shocked if you said it.
Accurate.
And this next one's going to probably be an obvious one too. Trail runs or road runs?
Trail runs.
Oh, how did I not know that?
I know, right?
All right. Favorite race distance to run?
I think I'm going to have to go with 50K.
Oh, okay. All right. First thing you do after a race?
Get some really disgusting meal, fast food, something horrible afterwards.
I feel like I'll interject here. He lays on the ground and pretends to be dead for about 5 minutes.
That first, and then it's food time.
Well, what's that disgusting meal? Give me an example.
So I'm not like a big fast food or soda person or any of that stuff, but like the whole time I'm running, I'm like just thinking about that first meal when I get done. And for some reason, I love like Chinese food and that kind of stuff. So it's funny because my stomach is usually pretty awful in races, but for some reason, when I finish a race, that's like the first thing I want to do is get like some greasy Chinese food and soda and chips and all that kind of good stuff.
Okay. Well, you deserve it after a race, especially if it's a long distance race, a 50 miler or something. Yes, you deserve that.
I agree with you. That's why I do it.
All right. Dream race to run.
Oh my gosh. That's a tough one because as far as like big distances, I don't know that I have like a specific dream race. Maybe something horrible like Badwater or something out there in the desert.
Oh, okay. All right. If you can go on a run with any celebrity or athlete, dead or alive, who would it be?
Celebrity or athlete? I feel like for some reason this is a really odd one, but maybe like Ryan Reynolds or something like that. I feel like it would. I feel like it would be like a hilarious run the whole time. I just feel like it'd be nonstop jokes and just like ridiculous stuff.
Honestly, that is so precious.
Cass, you sound like you. That's like, oh, that's a surprise answer.
That is kind of shocking. I thought he was gonna I don't know if you remember mine. I said Killian Jornet. Yeah. I was sure he was gonna say that. He went left field on me.
Completely left field.
I didn't want to make it too obvious, I mean, who doesn't want to run with Killian Jornet, like out in the mountains or something crazy?
Okay, that's wonderful.
All right, last one. Dream location anywhere in the world you want to go for a run.
Dream location. This is another random one, but I feel like maybe like New Zealand.
New Zealand, okay.
Yeah, I think just the scenery overall, running by the ocean, that kind of stuff, that would be pretty incredible to me. I feel like there's just so much untouched land, and the scenery that I always see whenever I see people traveling out there just looks incredible. So that's one that's pretty high on my list. I'd love to go do.
I also secretly think that it's because Lord of the Rings was filmed there, and the nerd in him wants to go be a hobbit.
I don't know what she's talking about.
All right, so let's kind of, before we kind of jump into, talking about the Javelina 100 race, Jared, let's kind of get a little bit on you. Are you originally a runner, or did Cassy kind of drag you into running, or was it the other way around?
So believe it or not, I didn't do any athletics or anything as a kid in school. No school sports or any of that kind of stuff. So when I made it to college, I just kind of started running with some friends and stuff. And I was the slow kid. And I don't know why it just like kind of bothered me that I was the slow kid. So it was funny. I think the first race I ever did was Peachtree Road Race. That was about 10 or 11 years ago now. Signed up for that. I had a coworker who talked me into it, and I was like, okay, let's do it. And after that first race, I was pretty hooked. And I, believe it or not, I got my main start in running in the obstacle course racing world. And that's anything from a 5K up to ultra endurance type events where you're doing 8 to 24 hours of nonstop running and obstacles, which is just insane. But that is like every other weekend I had a race like that. And that was kind of like the gateway drug that got me into ultra running. From there, I actually, before I really got into ultra running, I had run a half marathon, a road race, and I was looking for a marathon, and I didn't even realize trail running was really a big thing. And so I ended up stumbling upon the North Face, had a race in South Georgia, which no longer exists. It was one of the endurance challenge races. And I found a 50 miler, and I was like, my mind was blown. I was like, how is this a thing? How do people even run for 50 miles straight? So I don't know why I signed up. And then I panicked, and I was like, what am I doing? And long story short, I barely made the 14-hour cutoff of that race. And it was horrible. My feet were jacked. But the thing is, I finished. I swore I was never doing it again. And then like a couple of weeks later, I was signing up for more. I feel like that's most people's typical story.
Yes.
And then when I met Cassy, so she was into all kinds of different sports. She was mainly a triathlete. She did some trail running, road running. And I actually had her help to crew / pace me at Lookout Mountain 50 mile up in Tennessee, the Tennessee-Georgia kind of border. And it was funny the whole time, the very end of the race, she was like, this is so dumb. Why do people do this? And because I was in like, I was in an extreme low towards the end of that race. And I was just like, I want to be done. This is awful. And so believe it or not, like after that point, we started running more together. And then eventually she was signing up for ultras. And now I think she's more into ultras than I am. So.
Oh, really?
Yes.
He created a monster.
I did.
That's the way it always works out. So who runs the most between you two?
Definitely Cassy.
Wow, hands down me.
Okay. So
like Jared like runs really fast, like short distances,
okay.
but like a couple times a week.
I'll maybe run a couple 5 milers a week or something, and then I'll do maybe a longer 15 to 20 mile run on the weekend one day. And then I'll go run an ultra, and I pay for it, but that's just for some reason how I've always done it. I don't know why.
Yeah, Jared's method is don't train for races. Just show up and hope for the best.
Awesome. So the Javelina 100, what is that? For most people that might not know.
So it is a race just a little bit north of Phoenix in Arizona, desert terrain, and you are out there doing the distance is about 20 miles per loop, and you do 5 loops, and that gets you to the 100-mile distance out there in the desert.
So it's at McDowell State Park.
Okay.
And if you think of the desert, it's not all flat. It's kind of like rolling, rocky. I mean, now I'm very biased, but I would say awful terrain. But the loop is not flat. I thought the desert was flat. Do not believe that, because it is not. But the race company that puts on is called Aravaipa. They are absolutely lovely. They put on a damn good race. So check out their races for sure. If you're looking for a fun, like, desert, Arizona, Utah, some in Colorado, I believe. They put on really great races. We've done one other Aravaipa race, and it was hands down one of the best we've done. So, but the race company is really great. And one of the really cool parts about Javelina is Hoka is the title sponsor. So it really was exciting because this was actually my first like big Hoka race that we were going to get to do.
Okay. So here's the thing. That's 5 20-mile loops for 100 miles. Okay. Whose idea was that to run it?
I feel like it was kind of a joint effort. We actually have a couple running friends who had gone out there and run it previously. And they kind of talked to us about it and said, "Oh my God, you have to check out this race. It's typically around Halloween or on Halloween weekend, and it's a giant party in the desert, and you run 100 miles." And so we were sold, and we signed up for this like 2 years ago. But of course, the pandemic hit.
Okay.
And we ended up deferring because I know it was kind of strange last year. And so we finally made the decision. We're like, let's do it this year. And it was, I would say it was just kind of like that group effort. And we all ended up going out there and getting a house together. So it was a group of us from the East Coast who came out to run it.
Okay. And the reason why I asked that question, because, it's one thing to just be, sitting around and saying like, you know what, I think I'm going to run a race, a 5K, a 10, a half marathon or a marathon,
Yep.
So you think about it and you're like, okay, I'm going to go prepare for it for a couple of weeks, couple of months. And then you go out there and run it. But to run 100 miles, that's not something you just sitting around thinking like, yeah, you know what, I think I'm going to run a 100-mile race.
Yeah, I mean, in the Campanella household, anything goes, man.
That's right.
All right, so how did you prepare for it? So obviously you had to kind of defer it, because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So prior to that and even up to the race day, how did you prepare for it?
So I think we're both going to have two separate answers because we kind of did our own, that's the interesting thing about us is we both do kind of our own training plans. I mean, every now and then we'll run together, but for the most part, it's very separate and we have kind of our own goals for races. So
Okay.
For me personally, it was, for me, 100 milers, it's not so much the physical aspect, but the mental aspect that gets to me a lot. So for my training, funny enough, there's a lot of places we could run, but I chose to run a lot of loops. So like our neighborhood that we live in is just a tiny bit under a half-mile loop, paved loop. And it's not flat by any means. There's this hill. So you kind of cruise down and then you have to come back up. So I would do like a half marathon and I would just run. I mean, a half marathon on that loop is like 31 or 32 loops of the neighborhood. So I think all the neighbors thought that I was insane. They were like, what is that guy doing? And it was funny because like a lot of the neighborhood kids would start like clapping on some loops like, oh my God, yeah, you can do it. And so that was a funny aspect. But yeah, a lot of my training was, I don't want to say completely flat, but it was a lot of greenway running. It was a lot of neighborhood running. Around town, I didn't really go much into the trails or into the mountains or anything like that for this.
Okay. What about you, Cassy?
Mine was more my true blue style of just consistency. I just did my like daily miles and long runs on the weekends. My secret sauce is still back-to-back runs, which I'm sure you'll hear any distance runner will say. But I was pretty consistent. I felt pretty good going in. I had like kind of some roller, patches in my training. But overall, I mean, I knew from pretty much like the starting training block of my last training block, I knew I was going to get that buckle. Like, I just, you know what I'm saying? Like, right. I knew. So right. Hell or high water.
Right. And for the people listening, with this particular race, you get a buckle, not necessarily a medal. That's correct, right?
That's kind of a 100-miler thing. That's like in the ultra community. If you run a 100-miler, I feel like for a lot of people, the expectation is you're going to get some awesome buckle that you can kind of wear around and I don't want to say show off, but yes, show off that honestly, that you ran 100 miles.
Nobody wears them though.
No.
Like,
not a lot of people do.
They sit on a shelf and you just stare at them and you're like, look at that. Look at what we did.
Well, that's what I was going to ask next. I'm like, Cassy, so the next, time I ever see you, I'll probably see you with that buckle on.
So some people, believe it or not, it's a thing to do like buckle breakfast and stuff like that, where friends will get together and wear their favorite buckles and stuff like that from races. And that's kind of like a cool aspect to it. But yeah, I mean, I've seen buckles is the main, and I've seen like flasks and that kind of stuff where they engrave them with your name and finish your time and mileage and that kind of stuff for the, loop and 24-hour races and stuff like that. But yeah, buckles, that's it. You do it, and you want to feel proud and hold that buckle up when you're done.
Well, you should. 100 miles, you should.
Oh, yeah.
I find that the real celebration and prize is during the race.
Okay.
Like the carnage. So I don't so much care about the buckles anymore. I'm like all about the journey. Like, it's great.
Awesome. All right, so let's kind of approach it. You starting the race. So did you start and run it together, or did you both take separate paths, just like you do with your training? You kind of both take a separate path.
So with most races, we kind of go into it like Jared had mentioned, just in our training, we go into it very individually. And that's one of the things like I love most about the fact that both of us can do a race and have entirely different experiences in races. Mm-hmm. So we went into it like any other ultra or any other race, like just run your own race kind of thing. And although we started separate, we actually ended together, which is really cool. So I will tell you about my first couple loops, and Jared can tell you about his, and then he can go into the third loop where we where we saw each other. But my first loop was like so blissful and glorious. I was just running easy, like nothing on my mind, just kind of jogging, happy to be there. Kind of, in my own little bubble. I usually talk to people. I didn't, which was weird. But I ended up running with our good friend Carissa and Chantal, which they're like we have like a little crew that we run with. And it was just so nice to like spend some time with them, spend some miles. We just chatted. It went by so easy and quick. And then towards that, like the end of the first loop is when the heat kind of started in. So for me, the second loop, it was like a literal hell. Like it was so hot. It just like, if I wouldn't have had that ice bandana, like anyone that's even considering doing Javelina, even the 100K, just invest that like $7 or $11 or whatever that was. That ice bandana, I feel like saved my life for that second loop. But I started feeling pretty good, like once I got my body temperature managed. And then by the third loop, it had cooled down for me a little bit. So when I had seen, there's a station out there in the middle of the course called Jackass Junction. And that's where I caught up to Jared. So I'll let him give his piece on his first two loops.
Okay.
So my race form, I'm notorious for going out a lot faster than I should, even for 100 miles. So, of course, I went out there. I wasn't necessarily sprinting it, but I was running pretty fast. And I think in my mind, anybody who's run it in the past always said, oh man, that second and third loop are going to be super hard because the sun's going to come out and it's just going to be brutal. So in my mind, I was like, let me see if I can, let me get this first loop done quick and hopefully have it be, I guess, a cooler loop. And just like Cassy said, towards the end of that loop, oh man, that sun came out, and I probably looked like a desert nomad. I had a long sleeve shirt on, and it was more of like a cotton blend because that's a little bit better for that dry heat. And I had a hat on that had a cape on the back of it to kind of protect my ears and neck and stuff like that. So people were probably like, what is this guy doing? Because most people were like shorts and a t-shirt kind of thing. But the first loop, like you said, was awesome. It was a lot of fun, just very cruisy. And it was like, oh man, this is going to be great. It's going to be easy. And then of course the second loop hits in that full sun the whole time, because as an East Coaster, you have that humidity, which is brutal, but you have tree cover. So you're not being beat down by that direct sun.
Right.
But, of course, out there at McDowell, I mean, you can try to like pretend like you're really skinny and stand behind a cactus to get some shade, but that's about all you got. You got no trees or any of that kind of stuff to help you out. So it's brutal. It kind of beats you down. So made it through the second loop and then started into the third. And believe it or not, it was probably, I think, right at the 50-mile mark. So that would be Jackass Junction, is where I was sitting. And I had one of my, let's say, a support group. It was like a group of us. We're all sitting together just talking about, oh my God, this is so terrible. We should probably quit. And it's funny how that works out. And in true tortoise and hare fashion, what I always tell everybody, Cassy always ends up catching me at some point in the race because I go out hot and then I slow down. So Cassy ended up rolling into Jackass Junction, which was, again, right at that halfway point. And then from there, she was like, yeah, you're not quitting. You need to get up right now. And she started kind of dragging me the rest of that loop.
That's awesome. So, and of course, this is pretty much an all-day race.
Yes.
So you're starting pretty much before daylight?
Yes.
Right. And how high did the temperatures get during that?
So I think it was pure temperature was it was like 98 degrees or so. But with the heat index, I think it may have gone a little bit above that. So it was pretty rough. I'm thinking it was probably about 100 degrees or so out there.
Okay. So how do you prepare for something like that as far as your equipment and what to wear?
So overall, I'm always big on sun protection. I mean, I don't care how hot it is, even on the East Coast. I'm usually that guy with the long sleeve shirt on all year, just because I'm not a big fan of just smothering sunscreen on a million times. So again, a lot of just cloth to kind of cover. And it's interesting because you sweat, the cloth gets wet, and then a little bit of a breeze blows over it. It's almost like air conditioned in a way. So it kind of keeps you cool, even though you would almost think the opposite. Mm-hmm. So that was huge. And then, of course, the hydration piece and the nutrition piece, because the dry heat is interesting. You're not really sweating as much as you'd think, but then all of a sudden you look down at your shirt and it looks like a psychedelic tie-dye, like white streaks everywhere because of how much salt has left your body. Oh, wow. So that aspect is huge because electrolyte wise, if you're not fueling properly and you're not eating and getting those calories that you need, that's going to be it. It'll stop you dead in your tracks and you could start throwing up and having all kinds of bad issues out there in the desert.
So let's back a little bit. How do you fuel for something like this? We always talk about fueling for, a race, half marathon, a marathon. But for something of that distance, how do you fuel and stay fueled for that?
So again, I think that's a unique question to each person, because what works for Cassy definitely doesn't work for me and vice versa. So right. For me, I feel like I have an iron stomach out there. So, the aid stations are pivotal. There's aid stations that are about I think the longest one might have been 6 miles apart, which isn't too bad, but when you think of desert heat, it's pretty rough. So, we have a vest on, a running vest that has bottles for hydration, or you could put a kind of like a Camelback type bladder in the back. And then of course we carry a lot of nutrition type stuff, and there's so many different supplements out there. And I think, anything from like goo to honey stinger to I know specifically Roctane with Cliff and all that, the Cliff Chews and Roctane were big helps out there as well. But a lot of it is just almost looking at your watch and like clockwork saying, okay, it's been this much time, I need to eat something, because it's so easy to get into it. And then all of a sudden an hour or 2 hours go by and you haven't taken a drink or you haven't eaten anything. And then it's very, very hard to dig yourself out of that hole once you get there.
Okay. Yeah, because I got to experience that sometimes with more to do duathlon side, to remember the fuel, because my mind gets into like, okay, race.
Oh yeah.
And not like, okay, I need to drink some water, or I need to, chew right now, just like, yep. I'm ready to go. So I'm trying to imagine that from 100 miles.
Oh yeah, and ultra marathons are very unique in that the aid stations, I want to say they're like little buffets. There is like anything from like raw potatoes or cooked potatoes to candy to grilled cheese to soup to, I think something that was pivotal for us was one of the aid stations. They made us avocado and hummus wraps, and
oh, bless that man.
Oh, I know. pizza,
It
all
was
this
like
kind of
middle
stuff.
of the night, 2 a.m. We like rolled up, like we call it like ultra drunk, where you're just like sleepy and goofy. And we roll up to this aid station and we're like, you make us a hummus wrap, but add avocado. And this is like, mind you, this is at like 2 a.m. in the middle of the desert in a tent. Like, it's just wild. But those angels, the desert angels, made us and got us on our way.
Nice, nice. Okay, so you out in the middle of the desert. Did you encounter any wild animals?
So this is wild. I don't think you did either, right? No, during the race. But the house that we were staying at for the race, it was less than 5 miles from like the start finish area. And the morning before the race, we woke up and there was an entire family of javelinas.
Oh, wow.
It was like this omen.
Yep, it was a good omen, is what we kept saying. Okay, we're gonna do great in this race. We saw javelinas.
But they're like little dirty pigs. Like, that's what they look like.
Wow. And it's kind of interesting because, you think of those types of races, even with just a regular trail race, okay, you might encounter something. It might be something as small as maybe a squirrel or a deer. Or,
Yep.
I've heard stories where, people, some type of cat, whether it's a cougar, mountain lion, or just something.
Oh, thank goodness. No, we did hear some coyotes.
That was awesome because it was like middle of the night, because the race ended up taking about 27 hours. So we started in the dark, we ran through the night, and we ended up finishing the next morning. So this was like in the middle of the night. All of a sudden we heard a pack of, I think it was coyotes, and they were so loud. And I don't know if they were attacking something or what was going on. So that was a little bit spooky. Added in that night was actually Halloween. When it hit midnight during our race, it turned Halloween. So that was pretty cool to hear all the werewolves. That's what I was thinking in my mind. But to hear all the coyotes, on Halloween was a very interesting aspect of the race.
Werewolves.
Cool. Those exist now.
They do. Only out there at Javelina.
Were you a counter werewolf?
Love it.
All right, so I'm safely assuming that neither one of you encountered or experienced any type of injury during this whole race.
Believe it or not, I did. That's actually why it took 27 ungodly long hours. So Jared actually got a second wind after we got him, fed and watered and back to good camp counselor high spirits.
That's right.
So once we got him good, he was good. And then I don't know what mile it was. I think it was maybe like mile 70-ish, but I started to get some pretty bad blisters on my feet. And I think it just could have been like a number of things, but they got so bad to the point where I actually had to like visit the med tent twice. So I've never in any race had to stop at an aid station, take off my shoes, take off my socks. Like I've changed shoes very quickly at an aid station or at a point in some of the races, but never have I had to have a doctor look at my feet. So that was definitely different. It took a ton of time. I think it was one of the stops had to be 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
But as far as, it wasn't like injury where I couldn't go on, but like, man, I would put my foot back in the shoe and like the first 3 or 4 steps with the blisters. Oh my gosh. It was pretty painful. Wow. But you got to finish. I got to get that buckle. So
yeah, you got to get the buckle.
Right.
No matter what, you got to get the buckle.
Heck yes.
All right. So you finished. What's the first thing that crossed your mind once you finished?
I think for me, it was kind of one of those like, thank God moments, because towards the end, we were rushing quite a bit because the sun started coming up, and I think we were both dreading. We're like, oh my gosh, we don't need to be stuck out there in the full sun again for another day.
Right.
So that was a big thing, was just like a huge weight off our shoulders, because that last loop was, I think kind of, it was awesome, but at the same time it was horrible.
Right.
Because it's your last loop and you're like, oh my God, I don't have to see those aid stations anymore, or this certain stretch that was so terrible, So that was awesome. But I think the very first thing, it was just, again, huge weight off our shoulders. Getting the buckle was pretty incredible. Holding that buckle finally.
I definitely had like a moment of euphoria where I was just really proud of both of us, like Jared for getting out of his pain cave and like actually hanging with me, because he definitely, like, him and our great pacer Alex. Alex actually is a coworker of mine, and he was awesome enough to pace us our last loop. And him and Alex, I mean, they could have dropped me. Like they could have easily shaved off probably an hour, if not more, on the last loop. But they like hung with me. We had a good time. We had some quiet time. And then we just overall just had like a really awesome moment for like sunrise. So I think like when I crossed, it was almost like I was just grateful that I was in this place in my life where I have my health. I have the ability to do these wild races. And then I have people around me that not only support me, but advocate for me to do just like, chase my dreams and do big things.
Yes, that is always important. So let me step back for a moment. So what is there a time limit or, to finish this race?
Oh yeah. So every 100 has a cutoff. Some hundreds it's 30 hours, some hundreds it's more or less. I believe this one was 30 hours.
Okay.
So although we weren't even close to like not being able to like quote unquote make it, it was like much, much longer than either of us had planned. Both of us were shooting for, I think Jared was trying to go sub 24. I really didn't care. I just knew I knew where I was with my training. I was shooting for like anywhere between 24 and 26. So it took us much longer than we originally planned. Both of us have finished hundreds in under 24 hours. So we really had no scope of like time. But definitely like once you're out there, you're out there. You're at the mercy of that particular day and that particular race.
Okay. So yeah, and like I said, the more I kind of think about it, it's kind of like, 100 miles, you think about driving 100 miles and you're in a car, you have music, you have those things that can kind of just keep you going. But when you're out running on a trail for 100 miles, like I think Jared, you mentioned it's more like a mental thing that
Yes.
you have to be prepared. So how is that? Because at some point I can see my mind just wandering off into just nothingness.
I think that's why, this is just speaking for myself, but a part of me feels like that's why a lot of people run ultras, because almost like what Cassy said when she finished, throughout the run, I feel like it kind of recenters you. Like, I feel like, if this is going to sound really funny, but if you kind of feel like you've lost your way, I don't know what it is, but you go out there, you run 100 miles and you're out there for 24 plus hours. You have so much time to think about everything. And I always joke with people like, yeah, I solved world hunger out there kind of thing. You know what I mean? Because your gears are turning the whole time. And it's funny because you can really think about things, or sometimes you don't have to think about anything. And you're just caught in that moment of, running and your surroundings and stuff like that. I know some people like to run with music. Cassy does a lot. I, believe it or not, have never run with music before.
Oh,
so
really? Okay.
Yes. So if I have those moments where I'm out there by myself and there isn't anybody else with me, I personally, I don't mind that. I enjoy it. And I think being able to kind of hear, nature around me or hear the runners around me and stuff like that, I feel like that's kind of an important aspect for me. It's almost like a very spiritual thing. As far as being out there, just kind of getting lost in your thoughts, or if there's maybe something heavy that's weighing on your mind or whatever, I feel like by the time you finish that race, it's worked out. You're good to go.
Okay. Well, I think I can kind of relate that, with cycling. I don't ride my bike with music or anything, but I know riding long distance, I do get a clear mind because I can focus and kind of think things through while riding.
That's definitely it. I feel like there's kind of that quote there that like pain is weakness leaving the body. And I think there's a couple different variations, but you do get into those ruts where it's just, there is a lot of pain. And I feel like that's when your mind starts to wander a little bit more. And I feel like if you can kind of, again, put your mind on other things, you're able to go so much further than you really think. Because so many people say, oh, well, I didn't train for that, I can't do it. In most cases, if you are a fast hiker, some of these races, you'll be able to finish it. I mean, it's not always about speed. I think slow and steady wins the race sometimes. So that's a very big aspect of it, that, again, kind of going back to the mental aspect where, again, a lot of it's just in your own head. Oh, well, I'm not fast enough, or I didn't train enough, or I didn't, do this enough or that enough. But sometimes it's just, if you get out there and do it, I mean, next thing you know, you'll be at the finish line. So
yes, definitely. So what advice would you give someone if they're sitting here, they're listening to this podcast, and then all of a sudden like, yeah, I think I want to go out there and do this? What advice would you give them? Or, I mean, even just if they just want to start kind of go into ultra running.
Do it. That's what I would say. Yeah, I will be the first person to say, like he mentioned in the beginning, when I got into ultra, like the first time I paced him, literally the words came out of my mouth. I don't know why people do this. This is so dumb. And it was just like, to see where I've, where I started and how far I've come. I really think like just taking the first step and signing up for something that feels uncomfortable. And that might not be an ultra marathon, right? That might be a marathon. That might be a half marathon. That might be even a trail race. Like, I can't even tell you how many people I meet, weekly, that I'll talk to them and they're like, oh, I can't run on trails. I can hike and I can walk, but I couldn't run on trails, and it's like, that's the kind of stuff where I take a step back and I'm like, okay, so everyone's gauge of discomfort is going to be different. But if someone's considering doing either an ultra or, whatever it is, Javelina specifically, call me, please. Find my Instagram handle. Like, I will give you all the advice. But yeah, like, just sign up and just like take the first step and make sure, like, you're surrounding yourself with people that lift you up and take you there and help you get there.
Okay. All right. Was there anything that, if you could go back in time and kind of say, this is what we did during the race, but now that I know, if I could go back and tell myself, hey, don't do this, what would it be?
So I think for me, a big part of it was, the mental. So when Cassy came up to me at about mile 50, that was kind of when I was struggling a bit, where it was the mental aspect that was taking over. And I think nutrition, at that point, I think I was starting to slack on my nutrition. And I feel like, I don't know what it is, but if you don't take in enough calories, it's so much easier to get into a very negative mindset. You start feeling very tired and sluggish, and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is awful. I can't wait to be done. But once I started, like, it was force feeding. It was bad.
You're welcome.
I think for the last 40 miles, not even joking, it was like dry heaving and stuff. I never threw up, but I was force feeding myself. Every aid station, I was like, okay, I got to have some soup. Okay, I got to have some grilled cheese. So I just kept eating and eating. And honestly, it took miles, but that actually turned it around to the point where when I hit the finish line, I honestly feel like I could have kept going, which is crazy to say after running 100 miles. You think it would be just like, throw everything down, I'm done. But I think not only that, but of course, running with Cassy and also having Alex there, I think that's all very big spirit boosters too. But again, overall, I would say it's just nutrition, to focus more on that. That is what I would tell myself is, not to so much go, oh my gosh, it's so hot out there, and focus on that, but focus on just drinking and eating at that point.
Yes. And can we give a shout out to Alex on here? Like, talk about amazing, like basically walking for 20 miles, just being like this amazing spirit, just keeping us uplifted. So big shout out to Alex. But I will say I had nothing that I would change during my race. I know that sounds wild because my feet were jacked. I don't even know that I could have done anything to change the circumstance, but I really loved like the day that I had in its entirety. The hard patches, the heat, it was like so treacherous, but it kind of showed me that I won't be doing desert races again. So no, I loved it. I wouldn't change a darn thing about my day.
Okay. Oh, and then of course, which shoe were you wearing?
Oh, I was in the Speed Goat.
Yep.
And Speed Goat wide all the way.
Yep. Same here.
Yeah, awesome.
Yes.
All right. So what's next for the both of you? You got anything that you're training for now, or is there anything that's coming up in 2022 that you're looking forward to?
So this is again, an odd one, but towards the end of last year, last year was kind of like throwing myself into a lot of firsts. I did my first century ride, and I did some adventure racing and stuff that was totally out of my element. So I honestly would like to maybe do some more adventure races. And for some reason, I've gotten an itch to go back to obstacle racing. So I'm actually looking at trying to do, there's something called the Holy Grail that's associated with Tough Mudder, which I think a lot of people, if they know obstacle racing at all, Spartan and Tough Mudder are like the big two.
Yes.
But Tough Mudder, they have the Holy Grail is 3 different events, and they're all endurance level events, ending with World's Toughest Mudder, which is going to be, I believe, down in Pensacola, Florida in November next year. So that's something I've done. World's Toughest Mudder before. It's a 24-hour obstacle race. Again, you're running these loops for 24 hours, going through water, mud, electric shock, all kinds of crazy stuff. So that last time I did that was in Vegas, and it was crazy. Almost got hypothermia. It was a ridiculous thing. So I've had like 2-3 years to think about it. And for some reason I've gotten the itch to go back and try that stuff again. So that's something big. I'm going to be spending a lot more time in the gym and a lot more time doing, I guess, CrossFit style WODs and that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of looking forward to just changing it up a bit and trying that out. And of course, I'll probably sprinkle some, 50Ks or maybe a 50 miler in there throughout the year just to help keep the endurance up and help with running.
And I love how you just say, "Oh, I just sprinkle in a couple of 50."
Casual.
I mean, it's just very casual.
That's how it is. That's that weekend fun,
Yeah, just like I said, like, oh yeah, I just went out and ran 3 miles a day. You're like, yeah, I just go do 50 miles. How about you, Cassy?
Oh man, so it's pretty much a miracle that this happened, and I have no idea why the race gods or how the race gods brought me to this. But if you've ever heard of Western States 100, it's actually the oldest and one of the most prestigious 100-milers. And in a roundabout way, I was chosen. Well, I was given a ticket. I shouldn't say I was not selected in the traditional lottery, but I was given a ticket, and I will start crying if I talk about it, so I'm not going to talk about it. But okay. I got in, and I'm running Western States 100 in June of 2022.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I also will sprinkle in a couple 50Ks and 50 milers. No spoilers, but I'm very excited. Just like the lead up, the builds, everyone I'm working with and everything. So it should be a dream year for me. I'm very excited.
Awesome. All right. Any last words either you would like to share with the listeners?
So I have one more thing to add. For anybody new who's looking to get into ultra running, I think a big suggestion that I have is getting plugged in with running groups. I think that is probably one of the main things that really helped me get into the ultra running world. So with obstacle racing, there was a group known as the Dirty Peaches, and that's somebody that I got involved with here in Georgia. It was a big group of ultra runners and obstacle course racers, and that was a huge gateway there. Plus Yeti trail runners, we got involved with that group. I think a lot of times it's kind of daunting where if you try to take on the task by yourself and you're just like, man, I really want to run an ultra, but I really don't know what to do. Oh man, you get plugged into a community like that. And I'll tell you, I mean, there's so many people who are at so many different levels in their kind of ultra running career, I guess you could call it, that there's plenty of advice out there and people who could really sign up for races with you and all that kind of stuff. And it makes the experience so much richer and so much better when you have people to share it with.
Yeah. That's great advice. Great advice. So, Jared, Cassy, thank you for coming on the show. Cassy, thank you for coming on again.
Thank you. No,
Of
thanks so much
course.
for having us. This was a blast.
Anytime.
And if anybody wanted to get in contact with either of you, how can they do so?
Ooh, Instagram is my numero uno. I am at CassCamps2. And my betrothed, my beloved over here is JCampy90.
Okay, you're betrothed. Okay.
Yeah, I know. For better or for worse. He's got to deal with me.
That's right.
All right. Again, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so
No
much.
problem.
Eric.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Have a great day.
You too. Take care.
All right. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the No Gimmicks, Just Sweat podcast. We really appreciate everyone who tunes in each week. If you enjoyed today's show, please support us by subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember to tell your friends about the No Gimmicks, Just Sweat podcast, so we can continue to have awesome conversations with everyday athletes just like you. Until next time, have an amazing week.